complicated, you know, man. Like a dang Rubik's Cube, man. Like talking about a blue, red, man. Then you get to one side and like messed up.
All right. Pete Quinones, welcome back to the Jay Burden Show. How are you doing?
Doing good, man. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for coming back on. I realize you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you taking the time.
No problem. It seems to be. I think this is my busiest week of the year recording and writing. Well, not writing, but yeah, it's just. I don't know why I do this to myself. I just do.
Yeah, we were talking right before we went live, and I made a similar mistake, but nowhere near to the to the magnitude you did. Yeah, there's just something about it that, and I mean, look, and you're an old hand at this, but it is difficult to stay on your game mentally after 3 or 4 recordings a week.
Yeah, you have a tendency to start repeating yourself too, especially if you're on other people's podcasts, and try not to do that. And then, of course, I was on a live stream last night, and I said a bunch of things, and then I recorded from my show this afternoon, and I had to repeat myself a couple times from last night. And it's just like, all right, I don't want to. Yeah, it's like, you get something on your mind, and it stays there for a couple of weeks, and you really concentrate on it. Then you move on to, you get a new idea, you move on to that idea, and then you concentrate on that for a couple of weeks, and then you turn it, bring it all the way back around, like 6 months down the line. It's like, oh, wait a minute, I was talking about this at that time. There's so much when you're just constantly in this zone of just trying to figure out what's going on and figure out the best way through it.
I completely agree. And I am, I really, one of the things that I've learned from Academic Agent is just to hold your audience in complete and utter contempt. It's like, don't listen to the negative feedback at all. But every once in a while, someone will say something, and I'll be like, oh, that's completely right. And there's like 1 or 2 guys that will mention that I say certain phrases, or repeat certain analogies over and over again. And then listening back to my tape, I'm like, oh, damn, they're completely right on that one.
And I have no problem with that. I'm one of those idiots that actually reads the YouTube comments, and every once in a while, someone will make a really good point, and I'll take it into consideration. Or they'll make a suggestion that, and this is even rarer, a suggestion about, maybe you should talk to this person. Normally, it's like, have you had this? Like, so I released this episode where me and my friend Mark Claire discussed Graham Hancock's Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix, and we decided we were going to talk a little bit about that, then get into some like conspiracy theories about how we came into existence, how this civilization started, who's in charge, have they been in charge since the last ice age, things like that. And you put out an episode like that, and from the comments, it almost seems like people think that that's what you're going to be concentrating on forever now. It's like, oh, you need to really listen to this person on YouTube. You need to read this book. It's like, it was an episode. I'm past it. It's like myself and Buck Johnson just read Bernays' The Engineering of Consent and commented on it. And now somebody's gonna be like, well, you should do a whole episode, you should do a whole series on propaganda well, I've already covered propaganda. It's amazing. It's like people, and I know what they want. They want more. It may be something that they love, it's a real a pet subject of theirs, but my pet subjects I talk about over and over again on my podcast. It's like, if my pet subject was Ancient Apocalypse and Graham Hancock kind of stuff, it would be something that I would talk about. I'd have talked about 20, 30, maybe that'd be the whole subject of my podcast. It's amazing how people think, oh, well, now that you're doing this, like I started reading Race War in High School by Harold Saltzman. And people are like, oh, can you cover this one, which is basically, can you read this book, which is basically the same thing, but it happened in another state? Why?
Well, right. And especially because I have, one of the things that I've really picked up from Orrin McIntyre, because I've been in the process of kind of like putting together, because I'm a younger guy and kind of like newer in the field, basically like a list of, it's kind of like end of the year wrap up. Like who are people that I consider, like major influences on me, and what have they taught me? And one of the big things I've learned from Orrin is essentially this idea that like, look, like just because you are super far along, super far down the rabbit hole, does not mean that everyone else is. And if you launch into a conversation with someone about your most like incredibly granular opinions about something that most people have no even framework to comprehend, it's effectively, I mean, obviously people need to go there, but to a large portion of the population, it's wasted effort. And so because of that, I've always tried to keep a lot of, what I do on the show a little bit more, not entry level in the sense that it's like low quality, but kind of an introduction, right? Like I am pointing you the way towards people who know more about this topic than I do. And people will always say, like, well, it sounds like you don't know what you're talking about. Or like, why are you asking such basic questions? And I'm like, I'm asking basic questions because they're basic. Like this is an introduction. And again, it's like such a minor thing, but it's one of those things where it's like, the whole point of this exercise is not to teach the people who already are aware of this person. Like in that case, like, why are you here? And I don't know. I don't want to just endlessly complain about anonymous idiots on the internet.
Well, I mean,
that could take up your whole life, right?
But I think we both know that like YouTube comments where intellect goes to die.
Oh yeah, 100%.
I mean, you scroll through them and it's just like, okay, that's not relevant. I'm honestly convinced that most people who are commenting in YouTube comments just want attention.
Yeah, exactly. They want you to respond, and it doesn't really matter how they get that response one way or another.
Yeah.
Well, and that's actually why I generally don't block people on Twitter, but I will mute people. And then like every once in a while, I'll just be like, hey, what happened to that guy? And I'll unmute him and I'll be like, oh, you're still talking to me. And I kind of like that extremely dismissive attitude of like, all right, well, you can keep going, but I don't have to pay attention.
It's like, oh, now I know. Now I get it. Oh, okay.
See, I made a major mistake, and we can actually talk about something important after this, but I made the major mistake of asking for an artist on Twitter. And ever since I did that, I've been inundated with, like third worlders and bots all trying to like, hello, I am artist from Singapore. I do great profile picture art. And it was the worst mistake I've ever made because I can't use my Twitter DMs anymore because they're just flooded with bots. And look, like whatever Elon does to Twitter, I just hope he fixes this, because if I have to see someone else's like shitty DeviantArt OC in my inbox instead of the thing I'm actually looking for, I'm going to have a conniption.
Yeah. Oh no, it's one of the reasons that I really enjoy Substack is I've been able to put together a really good email list there. So I needed some help the other day. I needed some, I won't say what it was. It's kind of private, but I needed some assistance trying to find something. And I just put it out on my Substack. And there I know that it's going to go to people who listen to me read and everything like that. So yeah, if you build up an email list and and then ask, you'll have more of a warm market to plumb the depths for whatever you need in.
Well, and I feel like there's actually a lesson to be learned, because like anything else, this is a lesson you can kind of apply to any, social arrangement, that you do need, kind of like concentric circles, because, and it's even not a particularly large number of people, because obviously like this is a, a small channel and a small show, but like once you get past, 150 people, it becomes completely unmanageable to actually talk to people. It becomes you're just drinking from a fire hose. And so the advantage of things, like you said, like, like an email list or like a Telegram, is that you can actually get a real answer to a question you might want to outsource, because there are just things where it's like, hey, I don't know the answer to this, but there's a good chance out of 150, random people, someone knows the answer that's useful to have. But if you post that to, a site like YouTube or Twitter, where the audience is so big, you just get inundated with either not related or just like kind of aggressive responses.
Yeah. Yeah. Warm market is always the best market to operate in. So, yeah.
Well, and this might surprise the people listening at home. I actually didn't bring you on to just complain,
just bitch about
YouTube. Yeah, exactly, right. And I should say, despite anything I've said, I never read the YouTube comments, so don't get your hopes up, right? But I actually brought you on because, and I realize that there's some irony in having you, complain about, people mentioning certain topics. But you had an episode, a month or so back with two guys, talking about the Schofield Bible. And this is actually very rare that I thought it was such an interesting episode. I ended up buying the book. you guys talked about. I think it's called The Amazing Schofield and His Bible, I believe is the name of the book. And I'll be honest, I haven't read it yet. It's aspirational, but it did get me it did get me started, kind of like thinking about, kind of like faith and worship. And one of the kind of like old horses, like the old sawhorse in our spheres, is the idea that kind of progressivism is the new state religion. That it's not really a rational prospect, but it's political theology. So if you don't mind me asking, I know that you did go to seminary. So what is your kind of history with faith and religion personally?
Really weird. I mean, really weird. I mean, I think my dad just tried to cover the bases of everything. I mean, he was really young when I was born. My parents were like 18 and 19. And I mean, I was circumcised. I was baptized. I mean, all of the first 30 days and everything. It was like, I'm surprised, they didn't take me to Tibet, for some kind of Hindu thing or something like that. It was just, they were just weird people. I was raised Roman Catholic, raised in the Catholic Church. I was an altar boy for a while. I didn't go to Catholic school until high school. The first school I went to was a Jesuit school. I ended up leaving there, and I ended up graduating Catholic school. But Catholicism was never anything really serious for me. It was just more of something to do, because I mean, most things bored me as a kid. Also, I didn't have the greatest home life, so I wanted to get out of the house. And so going and spending time at church, and even when nothing was going on, and cleaning up and stuff like that, it just gave me something to do. After I graduated high school, I don't think I stepped in church again for another, I would say, 10 years. I was, what I guess the proper term would be, I was saved when I was, when I was about 28. So I started going to church, and had a really good church family. The pastor recognized that I had a pretty good voice, and I could get my ideas across. So he recommended going to seminary, and I started out just taking a couple credits and everything. Then I filled it up a little more, filled up the schedule a little more. I never graduated or anything like that, but I basically studied harder and learned more in seminary than I actually did in college itself. Around 2000, 2001, beginning of 2002, I met some people who were doing missionary work in Romania. So I went to Romania, and I was there for a while, building buildings, and not preaching the gospel or anything like that, but building buildings for people who needed help. So that was basically everything I did when I was there, was basically trying to counsel people and see that these buildings got built. Came back, and basically one of the things, this is my own problem in the mission field. I became very distraught, I would say is the word, with American Christianity. I thought that the work that I was doing in Romania was like the real work, like what we should be doing, should be showing love and not talking about it. And when I came back, I just decided I couldn't go to church anymore, and stayed out of church for a long while. And recently I've started to look for a church family again, mostly just because I feel like I want to. I'm at that point again. I want the fellowship. I want I need the support, kind of the support system. And I know that some people are like, oh, you need that. It sounds weak and everything. Whatever. I don't give a fuck. I really don't care. I don't care that people are like, well, you curse all the time. I don't care. Screw you. It's between me, between me and the Lord. You really, you don't seem like you forgive your enemy or love your enemy. It's like, okay, I don't care. I'm seeing things differently than you. And that's just pretty much brings me up to where I'm at. There was a lot of study when I was in seminary. I read a lot of books that I wasn't assigned. I was more interested. I've always been like the kind of person who goes to class and they say, read this book, and then I find another book to read because I just don't really like being told what to do. And yeah, that's pretty much my story. That's where I'm at now.
Yeah, I think that if I had to pick one, I guess, trait that kind of, unites our friends, our people, the people on this side of things, it's just that kind of like, and it's almost humorous at a certain level, but that kind of like disagreeability of like, no, you can't tell me what to do. Like if I'm going to read this, I'm going to read, if I'm going to read for your class, I'm going to read something, completely outside the, the curriculum. So I'm curious, right? Because I'm a younger guy, and I've kind of spent my, my formative years in kind of one of the cradles of, the evangelical movement, right? Like I live very close to, where Jerry Falwell had his church, right? So kind of like one of the capitals of the Bible Belt. And my first like early memories are in kind of the second Bush term, right? So kind of after, he kind of came to power. What was it like being in, American Christianity during the kind of like early Bush era?
I've always been really a rebel when it comes to everything. I know that sounds cheesy. Oh, you're a rebel. I was attracted to the Christianity of the Reformation, but reformed, what they call reformed theology now. Predestination, election, tulip. And I mean, I just saw, I'm like, well, we're not at war with Islam. I've always thought that we were more at war. We should worry more about what's happening here. And I always saw the regime in charge as the problem. Not so much growing up. Growing up, Reagan was there, and that Reagan was respect. I mean, Reagan won New York. Reagan won New York City. So I mean, he was pretty much respected across the board. But after that, when I got old enough to really pay attention to what was going on, I realized, especially when Clinton got elected, then I started paying attention to politics. Waco happened. I had questions about Waco when it happened. I remember the morning of the Oklahoma City bombing. It just seemed to me that the enemy was at home. So I knew that there were people who were running to like Bass Pro on the morning of September 12th to buy ammunition because they thought that they were going to be fighting like Muslims in the street. And my thought was more, I think the government's probably going to wage war upon us, our government. So I've always had a sort of, I don't really care about what's going on overseas kind of attitude. 9/11, I didn't really understand what happened on 9/11 until many, many years later. But the idea that, all of a sudden, we were going to be invaded by Muslims just made no sense to me. I was listening to the speeches that politicians were giving on the week. The 9/11 happened on a Tuesday. The rest of the week, when they went back in, and it was just, I'm like, what are you talking about? It's like, you're going to go attack who? This isn't a country. A country didn't attack us, and I mean, make the argument now that a couple did, but at the time, it made no sense to me. And you start then the anthrax letters. I mean, the anthrax letters to me were almost as confusing and infuriating as the 9/11 attacks, because the anthrax letters made absolutely no sense to me. It's just like, okay, well, I had a buddy who I worked with at the time who, you know, he knew who Osama bin Laden was in like 1995. He was talking about that. We had worked together and everything. And I asked him, I said, do these people have anthrax? And he's like, no. And I'm like, okay, then what the hell just happened? So, yeah, I mean, my Christianity wasn't informing what I thought was happening in 9/11, and you know, as far as that went. But I thought that a lot of Christians were, I mean, just basically retarded at that point when you heard some of what they were talking about, like, you know, war on Islam and everything like that. And I'm like, you realize Islam considers Christ to be a prophet, right? Like, they're upset at the, you know, if it was a bunch of crazy Muslims, they're upset at the country. They're not upset at you because you're a Christian. They're not upset because this is a quote unquote Christian nation, which we know it isn't. They're upset at the government. I mean, I always knew that.
Well, I almost feel like, because like red staters, they're my people, right? And part of the reason that I do, you know, criticize these people is because I see the good in them. You know, and to me, the great, like one of the great tragedies of, you know, the war on terror is that essentially, you know, many of these people who are not necessarily the most like intellectual types, you know, they're normal people, right?
Sure.
Essentially got played like fools, you know. And look, a lot of the guys who are slightly older than me, you know, kind of like older millennials who were, you know, had, you know, conservative parents, grew up in these, you know, these like, you know, southern areas, bought this stuff hook, line, and sinker, you know, just swallowed the whole thing, and then basically got shipped off to the middle of nowhere, you know, shot to pieces, and then brought back. And for what? You know, essentially for nothing. And they got something that in a different context, right? Your instinct to, you know, defend your own. They essentially got that kind of noble instinct hijacked for completely just, you know, evil ends.
Well, I mean, propaganda is a hell of a drug. You know, most people in this country are educated just enough so that they can buy into propaganda. And, you know, you had mentioned that, you know, these are regular people. They're not intellectuals. They're not supposed to be intellectuals. Not everybody's supposed to be an intellectual. Not everybody's supposed to be a thinker. But people just want to live their lives. But they are just inundated with this propaganda 24/7, and the internet hasn't made it any easier. Now they have, you know, they can talk to people halfway around the world on a machine in their pocket, and they can talk in real time. I mean, these are people who basically just want to, you know, it's the whole libertarian thing. You just want to be left alone to live your life, but they won't allow it. I remember a few years ago, I got introduced to a guy who was a green. He described himself as a green anarchist. Ted Kaczynski, you know, was reading Ted Kaczynski, you know, over a decade ago. Was going to protest, violent protests, and he left that movement to basically concentrate on permaculture and concentrate on himself. But one of the things that we talked about in that first discussion we had was the perniciousness of advertising. And he came to the conclusion that, and it's something that Edward Bernays talks about, I've talked about with friends of mine, is that the combination of just enough education to be able to read and understand something, and free speech being the excuse for social engineers to basically brainwash people into believing anything they want, isn't freedom, isn't liberty. And I remember talking to that green anarchist Bellamy, and him just saying, you know, advertising, when he was using the term advertising, but advertising and propaganda are interchangeable in my mind, because I read Bernays' propaganda, and all he does is talk about advertising in it. The perniciousness of advertising, and how until advertising and propaganda, we can get a hold of that, or because we're never going to have a culture, a population smart enough to not be able to fall for it, because you and I are intelligent people and we probably fall for it all the time. You know, we fall for it all the time. That what do we, you know, we have a real problem. You know, liberalism is a Western white invention, but the way it was sold, the whole live and let live, as long as nobody's hurting you, it's not hurting you or hurting somebody else or their property, it's not your problem. I mean, that's a failure. That's a failure. And watching, you know, I'll bring it all the way back to the people who, you know, bought into the 9/11 thing and, you know, went and joined the military and went over there, and, you know, if they didn't get killed or blown up or maimed, they ended up killing people and probably destroying their own souls forever. Is that, well, it's just basically they bought into a line that was sold to them, and they're just intelligent enough to understand it. They're just intelligent enough to embrace it, and they shouldn't have to. You know, what happened, properly understood, what happened in New York was not an attack, shouldn't have been considered an attack on the United States. Should have been considered an attack on the government. And it should have been considered an attack on the government's financial system, the financial system that they invented, that they profit from, and that they prop up, and that's falling apart. We've been seeing it since 2008, and it's been most clear since 2008. Really, the person living in, you know, the farmer in Kansas, 9/11, why should attacks in New York and Washington, D.C. even be on his mind? Now, if they attack his little town in Kansas, that affects him. But he's been fed this line of propaganda that, you know, oh, well, we're one country and we're all in this together, as he complains about, you know, the transgender kids in New York. You know, isn't it amazing that all these boomers and conservatives who for 6 or 7 years screamed that everything coming out was fake news, but as soon as the Ukraine war started, not all, but an insane amount of them immediately started talking about Russia bad, Putin bad.
Well, right, and I think that there's a common disgust in our circles, right, for kind of the normie, you know, the average guy, and I think that it's understandable but misattributed, right? Like, these people they're doing the things you describe.
They're
right?
Victims.
But exactly,
they're victims,
and I don't mean to say this in a condescending way, but to be honest, these are not people who are designed to be in a political situation. That's not how their brain works, right? They're essentially normal people. And to be honest, it's probably better to be a normal person, you know, than to be some type of like extremely political autist.
Really?
But nonetheless, yeah. But nonetheless, right, the same like instincts that in any other time would serve these people well, which is just this like, yeah, I'm going along to get along. You know, the guy in charge, he probably knows what he's talking about. Like that's the thing that keeps you alive 1,000 years ago. But now, like, our elites, the people in charge are so evil and so short-sighted that, you know, they're essentially like driving these essentially normal people to self-destruction. And for what? Right, to line Zelensky's pocket, or to line, you know, the pockets of, you know, certain interests in Washington, right? Just a little bit longer.
Well, there's too many interests. That's the problem. Is okay. So I think last number I saw was there's 2.1 million federal employees. Most of those are paper pushers who go to work 8 hours a day, but really work about 2 hours and do absolutely nothing. It's probably like 2,000 of them that actually are involved in what's going on, in the corruption, in the utter depravity of what's going on up there. So you have too many interests. They have power. They have what, in the eyes of many people, is legitimacy to what they're doing. So they can basically get away with it, and also, people talk about, we need decentralization. We need decentralization down to local areas. Let's make people, think local, act local. I think that's Brian McClanahan's line. And I agree with it. But the problem is that they're just, it's Plato's cave. Most of these people you talk about, you're talking about the normies and everything. It's never said in Plato's cave, I don't think, that those people are in there of their own volition. As a matter of fact, I think they're chained in there, and they're only shown what somebody else wants them to see. So, when they see that an attack happens in New York, but they're in the middle of the country, they're told, they're shown, and their programming kicks in that that's about them. That the people who did that hate them. Hate me. I mean, I never once on 9/11, when I realized what was happening, thought that the people who did that hate me personally. But yeah, how many people actually literally took it to heart that these people hate them personally? I mean, we talk about the normie. We have a tendency to really look down upon the normie. But it's like I said, many of them are victims, just like the people in Plato's cave. They're shown what they can. And here's the thing. Nothing's going to break them out of that. That's who they are. I went to Thanksgiving, met people I had never met before, never talked to before, but small town Georgia. Good people, kind of people that'll wake up in the middle of the night and come help you if you're broken down, do everything they can for you. But you hear stuff like, if we get DeSantis elected in 2024, he can change things. Thankfully, they didn't say he could save us. They say he can change things. And I'm like, well, what makes you think that when Trump couldn't? Maybe Trump didn't want to. That's fine. You can make that argument. But somebody who's living through all of this, who lived through 4 years of Trump, who lived through the last 2 years of Biden and Harris, and who's saying, and who probably says that thing that happened in November of 2020, there was probably something wrong with it. I'm not going to say, because you want to put this on YouTube, Susan. I'm not saying anything about that thing in November. I'm not claiming.
Thank you for being kind. I appreciate the gesture.
But I have 2 strikes because of that stupid thing on my channel. They probably think that's something that was untoward. Yet they're looking forward to 2024, and they already experienced the midterms where it looks like something could have happened in certain places, and they're pinning their hopes on Ron Wailing Wall DeSantis.
Well, right, and it's, to me, because I was talking when I was on Millennial with Woes about this, like, okay, what are the big themes? What are the big takeaways from 2022? And to me, kind of the pivot point of the year was the midterms, right? Because there was part of me before then that could have been convinced that there was going to be an attempt to, quote unquote, go back to normal, right? That, as we all know, the Republicans never actually really do anything. And so they would let them have the win, as a release valve, right? They'd, win all those seats in the certain, states that it looks like they were going to, and nothing would really change, but it would kind of dissipate, the anger among red Americans, right? A tried and true tactic. It's happened, a half dozen times in the last 50 years, right? Mm-hmm. And to me, that was kind of a branching path. If that had been happened, if that had happened, excuse me, I promise I know how to speak English, then that would have kind of shown us that, all right, these people are, they're not our friends, they're still evil, but they're cool heads here, but the fact that they almost couldn't resist, even in elections that, to be honest, probably wouldn't have mattered that much. To me, that kind of shows me like, oh, that tells me the character of the people in charge, and they're no longer, say what you will, but if the people playing the game during the Cold War, and they weren't good people, but they were competent people, like people like Kissinger. Like Kissinger's no saint, but he's not a moron. Right. And I'm not sure who is necessarily in charge right now, but I'm quite sure it's not, quote unquote, the adults. And to me, right, the idea that, and you're 100% right, that, oh, well, if the last one wasn't fair and the one before that wasn't fair, well, if we just vote extra hard this time, it'll matter. And look, like, obviously, I live in a state where people voting has benefited my life dramatically. We're now a red state. Who knows how long it'll last, but it's a stay of execution. And you know what? That counts as a W. So I'm not saying don't vote, but like, hey guys, maybe don't fall for this one again. Maybe don't. It's like Charlie Brown in the football. It's like, how many times does Lucy pull it away? You land on your ass, and how many times do you get up, brush it off, and then be like, all right, let's run this one back. And I was kind of making fun of David French on Twitter, as I'm wanting to do.
That's not hard.
I know. It's like playing wheelchair basketball. It is one of those things where it's like, okay, but sometimes it's so easy I can't stop it. Where he was basically like going on about how excited he was about the next elections. And I just made that point. I was like, do you think David French wakes up and says, next time, it'll work next time? The conservatives, the good conservatives, they'll do it this time. Like, I just don't understand how you can sustain that delusion. Maybe once after 2020, but after 2022, it's like, okay, this is the way things work now. We live in a banana republic, and either you learn to play that game, or you do what conservatives have always done, which is rationalize their losses.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I've come to really try to concentrate on local politics. I'm in a very red state. I mean, our governor in November won by over double the next closest vote, so the person who was running against them. So I don't know that I see our state going blue. I mean, you're going to have big cities you're going to worry about, but I mean, I'm looking for a much smaller. I mean, I lived in Atlanta for 15 years. Any place you move outside of there is going to be smaller, but it's much smaller, probably 10% of the population of Atlanta. But I mean, I'm going for less than 10% of the population where I am now. And I'm concentrating on local politics. And I really believe it's the only way. And I think that if you can get into a town and really start talking to people, that they can start seeing that, okay, maybe they can still believe that a presidential election is important. But, my goal is to make them realize that that what we do in this town is a whole lot more important. Now, I said that to say this. We've been talking about the fact that these aren't people who are intellectuals. They're not going to read Schmidt. They're not going to read Yaki. They're not going to seek out texts that are going to, they won't even read the Populist Illusion, which is 100 pages. So I've come to the conclusion that basically what we have to do is we have to tell them what to do. We have to become mini dictators. And, if you want to do the small town strategy, you go in there, maybe get elected to a local office or something like that. I mean, I would love to see all of my friends become sheriffs, because the sheriff is probably the most powerful person in any town. And you basically tell them that this is the way it's going to be now. We are going to concentrate more locally. And one of the main focus we're going to have is that if the state or if the federal government comes in here to try to do anything, force us to do anything, change the way we live, we are going to fight them. If the ATF comes in here to take someone's guns, we are not going to help them, and we are actively going to work against them. Same with the DEA. So we will take care of ourselves. We're a town of 2,000. Why do we need help from anyone else? We all know each other. Most of you people grew up together. I really honestly think that's really the only way forward. And I think that it is going to take, basically, I've said this before, you run a bunch of your friends, take over the government, and you change it to what you want it to be. And I think COVID proves that most people go along with you. There'll be a very small minority that'll be like, no, we're not doing it that way anymore. You know, we're not doing it your way. We want it the old way. No, people are malleable. People are, a lot of people are just plain ignorant. And that's not me saying that I'm, making myself so much smarter than everyone else or trying to put myself up on a pedestal above people. But people need to be told what to do. People need to be told what to believe. Anyone who isn't at that point, who hasn't reached that point yet, in realizing that, I mean, you're probably one of those people who needs to be told what to do and what to believe.
Well, and that's one of the big things that I remember learning from Yarvin is he has this point, and this is in his early days, right, where he's essentially writing to an audience of libertarians, where he basically sets aside, he's like, look, like I have, speaking as Yarvin, right, a similar view on the ideal society as you. You know what? Like, I want a society of just spontaneous order where everything just works without you having to, command every aspect of it. I just want people to be able to be safe, to be able to, go about their daily lives with the minimum external interference. He's like, look, I want that too. But the problem is, and he points out something really insightful, that there's this mental trap of assuming that the way you operate when you have power is the same way you got the power in the first place. And those are not the same thing at all. Because to be honest, if you want a kind of like low interference society, and you see this trap all the time with, conservatives and libertarians, where they're like, all right, well, if we want a society where you don't have to be interfered with, well, we'll just disable, quote unquote, that's how they pitch it, right? The ability of the state to interfere with you. We'll just, well, if we want a society, with no welfare, well, we'll just campaign on lowering taxes and that'll work. But the problem is, essentially, in order for that ideal end state to work, someone has to be formally and fully in charge, right? There has to be a backstop. It doesn't just happen by default. It has to be created, and there's this kind of like squeamishness towards power that I see on so many of, in addition to, libertarians, but also just like the broader, kind of like normie right, that I think is just a complete and total like waste of time. If you're not willing to actually make it happen, then of course your ideas are going to lose. And to me, that's kind of like one of the primary, I guess, insights I've taken from, your recent work over the last year or so. Well,
how was I going to respond to that? You got me flustered now.
Sorry. I mean, I can keep talking if you want.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So what I meant to say is, and I can kind of distill this into a more, intelligently, expressed point, essentially, that there's this cultural myth, right? And you see this in the way that, the resistance fighters and other like, warriors for democracy are portrayed in media. Because a lot of what the regime does is kind of this, and I don't mean to say this in a tinfoil hat sense, is this kind of programming.
Is this your condensed version, Jack?
A valid point, Pete. A valid point. But I am bringing it to a hopefully a finer point, where the idea is this, and you see this, right? That, in order to be, the benevolent person in power, well, you have to get power by being benevolent. If you are good, therefore you will become good and in power. But that's just not how history works at all. You know, and I see people who would be on our side acting that out, or would be more on our side. And it's just, you know, they're being handed, you know, a faulty set of tools.
Yeah, this is right in my wheelhouse. The whole thing about, you know, well, if you're going to be a benevolent ruler, you have to go through the. I mean, this is what Thomas 777 refers to as the Nuremberg regime, where basically conservatives and people on the right, people who would be proper right wingers, you know, who would be race realists, who would be anti-egalitarian, who would be complete for hierarchy, have just been completely destroyed because those thoughts are too right wing. Basically, the only way you're allowed to be right wing in this country, the only proper right winger in this country, is somebody who is, you know, is propagating progressive talking points from 10 years ago. You can't, you know, you have to be, if someone calls you a racist, you have to, I'm not a racist, you're the real racist. You know, I mean, how did Trump get elected? He got elected by basically speaking his mind, saying they're not sending their best, they're sending rapists, they're sending, I mean, you know, say what you want, people can make all sorts of, you know, so, oh, well, that's not really meant. Stop making excuses for the man. That's what he meant. I mean, and it's to a certain extent, I mean, it's true. There are enough, I could just start listing off cases and cases and cases. But to be a right winger who's going to get elected and who is going to actually make changes, that person is going to have to not be what the right wing has been since World War II. The beginning of World War II, there was a real right wing in this country. There were people like Charles Lindbergh and Taft and all these people. They were a proper right wing. They got completely destroyed by World War II. And, you know, I've addressed this recently that, you know, the cope that so many people use when they get compared to the National Socialists is that, oh, no, the National Socialists were actually leftists. It's in the name, socialist. It's like, yeah, a bunch of anti-egalitarian people who believe in hierarchy and based around a military, which is, you know, the ultimate anti-egalitarian organization that believes in hierarchy. Yeah, they were left wingers. Sure. Nice cope. I know you're sick of getting called a Nazi and everything, so you have to jump through hoops to do this. But that's what Nuremberg gave us. It gave us the fact that anyone who considers himself a right winger, and it's like they don't even call themselves right wingers anymore. They call themselves conservatives. Why? Because conservative sounds more safe than right wing. You know, people have been asking me people ask me recently, oh, what do you call yourself now? And I'm like, paleo right winger. I don't know. You know, I like that. That pisses people off. And someone tried to be like, oh, so like paleo conservative. I'm like, no, paleo right winger. Nothing conservative. Conservative is the cuck version of, well, I'm right wing, but I don't want to say that I'm right wing because right wing is not acceptable anymore. You know, and they don't understand why it's not acceptable. They don't understand why Joseph McCarthy needed to be crushed for what he was doing. You know, and Joseph McCarthy wasn't even particularly like the smartest guy, but I mean, he understood what was going on. So, I mean, there's no proper right wing in this country right now. And I think Thomas has said it right. Basically, anything that's right wing, anything that considers themselves right now are just basically reactionaries. There's a bunch of reactionaries who are reacting and losing. And then there's that other faction that calls themselves the right, that whenever people like me go too far right, they call us a fascist. The left doesn't even have to call you a fascist anymore. There are people who consider themselves right-wing who are willing to do that for you.
Well, and that's why I probably have spent more time criticizing, more time attacking, what I like to call the house conservatives, the good conservatives. The people whose their primary instinct, the primary thing they exist to do is they'll wave their hands about the left. They'll scream, they'll cry like, oh, my bathroom, my women's sports, all the things that are just so important. But they never try to get those people fired. They never try to ruin their lives. What they do is when they find someone like you or I, they can sink their teeth into. And it doesn't even have to be someone, a big name. It can be just someone tangentially related. They will move heaven and earth to ruin that person's life because those people threaten them, because they know that their base is essentially going for the most right-wing thing available. When you see this with kind of yesterday's radicals, and I won't mention him by name, I've spent too much digital space already, tearing this guy a new one. The people who were really edgy and out there in 2005 or 2010, now when they've been kind of, subsumed by, maybe the very nascent, right-wing movement in America, they flip out because, to be honest, it threatens their grift, and they know that if they're not useful to the regime, they're out in the cold and they can't hack it out in the cold. And so they will scream, they will cry to keep the modicum, the little sliver of power and relevance. They still want to be invited to the Beltway parties. They still want to be allowed to write for the Atlantic once or twice. And that little crumb of relevance is all it takes for them to sell out their people, quote unquote. It's why I have nothing but contempt for these people. And I think that we spend entirely too much time complaining essentially about mentally ill, blue-haired shitlibs who don't matter. They don't matter. They're funny. Like, don't get me wrong, they're funny, but these people are not important. But the people you can affect, the people you can actually reach out and touch, verbally, again, not in any way physically, the people you actually can interact with, that should be your target, not these retards of TikTok.
Well, I think Libs of TikTok does a good job of exposing parents to exactly what the regime is. It's just they don't present it that way.
No, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound like I was, insulting what Libs of TikTok does. They provided a great service by literally just showing these people.
Yeah, I mean,
for who they are. But these people are not the end boss.
No, they're not. And if there had been social media to show more Germans what was happening in Weimar, maybe that could have been turned around in a different way. Probably not, though. But I have a hard time. I don't want to make. Have you heard this war between Charles Haywood and Rob
Dreher? Yeah, I've actually. He's the guy I wouldn't talk about because I have talked about him too much, and it's. I'm willing to for the sake of the conversation, but I think that I've probably said everything I think about him.
I saw you and Peru did a live stream. But I have a hard time criticizing Libs of TikTok because I don't consider them to be the enemy. I know that they could do more to point out that the regime is the one backing this. That this is coming from somewhere, and you should probably understand where it's coming from. But I think with we were talking about how most people aren't intellectuals. I mean, I've heard the woman who runs Libs of TikTok started it talk. She's not intellectual. She's just basically doing what she thinks. Trump wasn't an intellectual. I mean, what book do you think Trump's ever read? He probably hasn't read Art of the Deal front to back.
Yeah, I was about to say I don't. Yeah.
So most people, we were saying, most people aren't intellectuals. So basically, we just have to accept what they're doing because they're enemies of the people that they're on our side. And when Charles says no enemies to the right, I mean it's a great idea. It's a wonderful idea. The problem is that there are so many enemies to the right. Not to the right of us, but on the right. I mean, it's just when you realize that a lot of the people who you know, are out there fighting and who are actually, you know, not everybody's going to be like DeSantis. You know, say what you want about DeSantis, but he shut down Florida for a while, and then he like studied. I mean, he can quote the statistics off the top of his head. He doesn't even need notes. So I mean, I don't know if you want to call him an intellectual, but damn, he's smarter than a lot of the people that I heard bitching about the COVID regime. You know, he could speak more about it off the top of his head than other people could, than, you know, a lot of people. But I don't know. I think we just have to use whatever we can, and have to use, yeah, I say this and it sounds terrible, use whoever we can. And I think most people understand what I mean by that, to win. And yeah, I don't expect to see that win in my lifetime. I'll be dead and still complaining about this regime and everything. But I also think that there are things that we can do, you know, to make our lives more, to make our lives better, so that we can mitigate the problems that come along with what we're experiencing now. And I really wish more that, you know, that's going to be something that I'm going to try to educate people on more, in, you know, just that, you know, the U.S. government is very powerful, but they do not have the manpower to go to every small town that defies it and start a war with them. Neither do they have the desire, for the most part. You know, they're just, you know, there are a lot of you know, Waco's a great example. Waco all of that could have been avoided if they would have went to Sheriff Harwell, and then if the ATF would have went to Sheriff Harwell and said, "Look, we're looking at the guns that they have over at Mount Caramel. We need your assistance." But they decided that they were going to bypass Sheriff Harwell. I mean, and now if they would have went to him, and Sheriff Harwell would have been, "Well, you have no jurisdiction here. Screw off." That'd have been interesting. That'd have been interesting to see how that would have, the reaction to that. But you can see what just a little group, you know, a group of, you know, well-armed people in a house, how they could fight back and basically, you know, take out 4 of their enemy, you know, while losing some of theirs. But I mean, you're going to take casualties in a war, you know, but they don't, I don't think they want that anymore. And I don't think they have to do that anymore either. You know, people are like, "Well, if you take over a town, they'll just drone strike you." I'm like, if they really wanted to make a project out of you, they just debank everyone. They just deperson everyone. They don't need to kill you anymore. No, they just need to, you know, do what they've done to like Owen Benjamin and Ryan Dawson, and, you know, what they're doing to Ye now, where they'll just take away your banking. You know, so, but I mean, I know I'm ranting, but to me, everything comes back to local, and I really wish more people, you know, it's like when I talk about local and someone posts a comment, "Oh, well, they'll just drone strike you." To me, that person's just a fucking idiot. I mean, you have not given it the level of thought that I've given it. I've written how many articles I've written on Waco. When COVID started, I was in the middle of writing a book about Waco. Yeah, 20, 25 years down the line, what I found and what my research did. You know, so when I look at local, I do my research. Put it that way. I know. I've looked at what local ordinances. I've looked at mayoral power in certain towns. I've looked at the power of the sheriff in certain towns, the power of the chief of police in certain towns. I'm not stupid when it comes to this. And sure, they can come and drone strike you, but, you know, Do you want to be a pussy your whole life, or you just, you want to sit back and let them do this to you?
Well, I completely agree, and look, right? Like, I'm not advocating anyone do anything stupid by any means, but
no. But here's the thing.
This...
Let me say this. When I say, one of the reasons I say you take over the government, you have the police force on your side, is because that is an air of legitimacy. Even the person, if you hear about, the ATF is declaring war on some sheriff's department somewhere, people are going to be like, why? It adds legitimacy. I'm not saying, basically what I'm saying is, I'm using the whole libertarian argument, is you don't go on the offensive with these people, but you basically build up a legitimate government, local government, and legitimate local police force, and a legitimate sheriff's office, that if they come for you, you're ready. And people, you can't go to war with this government. Who's in charge? You can't go to war with the United States government. Who's in charge? Tell me who's in charge. I mean, people are like, oh, it's a hydra. There's many heads. I'm like, it's not a hydra. It's a blob. At least with the hydra, there's a limited number. There's a limited number of heads that you can cut off, and then you can kill the hydra. This is a blob. Who's in charge? No one's in charge. 2,000 people are in charge. 2.1 million people are in charge. But how would you take it down? No, you have to build what comes next. And I think what comes next is basically de facto balkanization. Just where you're like, okay, well, we're going to be over here and we're going to govern ourselves, and leave us the hell alone.
I completely agree. And there's this thing you see a lot in right-wing circles where it's like, no matter how powerful the feds are, they're never as powerful as the feds inside your own brain, right? Where people spend so much time just obsessing, but like, oh, it's the feds, it's the feds, it's the feds. And it's like, go outside. Go outside. Turn off your phone and go outside.
Everyone's fine. And everyone else is a fed. It's like, so like you're a fed. I remember I was doing, this is like a while back. A buddy of mine did a documentary on Fuentes having his being put on the no-fly list and having his bank account emptied. This was a while back. This was earlier this year, and somebody in the chat just is like, "Oh, Fuentes, catboy this, catboy that," and it's like, look, I'm on here with a friend of mine, and I control this stream, and I'm putting your ass to sleep. I'm kicking you off the channel for 5 minutes. And then this person on the right is like going into other chats and super chatting and going, P. Quinones is defending Fuentes. The friend-enemy distinction is in play here, and Pete is not a friend. You insult a friend of mine? Someone that I've drank with, somebody that I've had meals with, somebody that I've hung out with? Go fuck yourself. I don't know you, fucking random anonymous piece of shit in a YouTube chat, but I know this motherfucker who I've spent time with. And this is the right. This is the there is no fucking right-wing movement. There's no dissonant right movement. All these motherfuckers I have the idea of how this is going to be done. I have the idea of how this is going to be done. Well, the way it's going to be done is I'm going to go into other people's YouTube comments, and I'm going to make comments, and I'm going to tell them how wrong they are and everything. While half these people have to still be living at fucking home. And I'm sorry, I have no problem with people living at home, but fucking, if you're young and you're still living at home, cool. But act like you fucking been somewhere. Act like you have a friend in real life that you're willing to fucking defend. I mean, seriously, how are you going to be a part of a movement that is looking to, take down the groomers and destroy the groomers if you can't understand, if you don't understand who your friends are?
No, that's completely right. And I think that you see who's serious and who's not. You know, who's just essentially looking for who's a loser looking for friends. You know, and who's actually like serious about accomplishing things. Because look, like there are people in our circles that I don't like. You know, their personality rubs me the wrong way. I think they're wrong. But you know what? You shut the hell up. You don't have to bring it up. It doesn't matter. Because to be honest, it doesn't matter most of the time. Like if you pull me aside and you're like, hey, what do you think about this guy? I'm like, yeah, he's not my favorite. You know what? That's fair enough. People talk. But this idea that everyone needs to, you know, just be constantly like infighting and like just producing this like stupid catty dialogue. Like it shows you who's essentially using this as a form of entertainment, you know, and it's a waste of time. Yeah. But anyway, Pete, we're coming up on time. So where can people find you if they don't already know?
Well, you can find me complaining and yelling at everyone at the Quinones show, all podcatchers. I still have my YouTube channel for now, but I would my Odyssey channel has everything, playlists and everything like that set up. So go over on Odyssey and search me out, and you'll find me there. PeteSubstack.com. That is where I do a lot of writing, a lot of complaining. I think the tagline I use is where I try to funnel all my hyperbole. And yeah, that Old Glory Club, I think we both know a little bit about that. And yeah, that's about it. I really appreciate it, Jack. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, man. And obviously those will all be down in the description. As for my links, you know, you guys know where to find me. The show is obviously available on YouTube, also on Apple, Spotify, you know, all the podcasters you guys use. And I have a little bit of a scheme set up where the 10 most recent episodes of my show are available for free as audio files. And then after it drops out of that, you know, that's 10 most recent episodes, you're going to have to throw me some money to get access to the audio backlog. They're always free on YouTube, but you know, the paywall is just a little bit of a way for me to cover costs of the show. I realize it's not a huge thing, but every little bit helps me out. And the links to socials and everything else will be down there. And again, Pete, thank you so much for coming out.
Anytime. Thank you.
And remember, everyone at home, keep your head up. The lie can't last forever. Good night.